Welcome to the Mom as Well podcast, where we are digging deep into the gifts and the gaps of foster and adoptive parenting. I'm Tara Hutton, and I'm glad you're here. Mama's Well. Yes, she is. Well, hello. If you are at the Mom as Well podcast, you're in the right place. And if it's your first time here, this is a podcast that is actually created. I think I'm coming to understand that it was created for me. It was created for me to continue my growth and my healing and my understanding of trauma and how it impacts my parenting. To continue to grow in my understanding of how I can't give what I don't have, and that I have to stay focused on my own well-being, so that I am filled up, so that I can, reach down into that deep well of things that I have learned through my own childhood trauma and my own struggles, and draw on that to help my children. And so if you are here and you are interested in that, then you're in the right place. And particularly today, you're really in the right place if you're interested in that. Because, and I'll just go back to my own childhood, but when I was growing up, we didn't talk about things like mental health, emotional health. Really, the only time we talked about those kind of words were we were referring to someone that was going to the loony bin, or just it was severe, right? If we use those types of words. And, I might be dating myself, and maybe it wasn't like that for you, but in my community, in my churches, and in my home, we just didn't talk about our mental and emotional health. And, I'm so glad that I am no longer unaware of the importance of that. And I've become aware of just how important it is. And my guest today, she really gets that. And as a matter of fact, she has made bringing awareness to that her life's mission, really. And we can get more into that in a little bit. But I think that you're going to find that she's just a wealth of knowledge. And I think that her enthusiasm and passion for this will hopefully spill over. So I'd like to welcome my friend, Sherry Burkhard. Oh, registered nurse too. Registered nurse. Yep. And the executive director of Mosaics of Mercy, wife and mother to two amazing kids, who are very self-aware, by the way. So welcome, Sherry. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm very glad to have you. I love anytime I have a conversation with you, whether it's in the car driving our kids to college, or sitting in your office, or on the phone. So thank you for talking to us today. I want to start off by asking you to tell everybody, what is Mosaics of Mercy, and where did that come from? I mean, I start with what it is. As best you can explain that. I think it's a fabulous thing, and I'd like to hear more about it. So tell me about it.
So Mosaics of Mercy is a nonprofit that I co-founded with 4 other ladies about 5 years ago. And what we saw was this huge gap in the community with people being able to connect to mental health resources, either in regards to something going on with their mental health, grief, addiction, all of those things. Regardless of their ability to pay for those services, it's still difficult to navigate. And we were brought together by one of the founders, who was actually a worship leader at a church. And she knew all of us, but we didn't know each other, and just invited us to sit around a table. And out of that, the 5 of us felt like we were called to step out and do something in the community to help correct what we saw. And so from that came Mosaics, and our mission is to help families navigate mental health and addiction recovery. And we do that we have family navigators right now. Myself, Kate Turner, who you had on as a guest, who's an LPC, and then Sarah Lee, who has her master's in counseling. So we have basically people call in. We will help them find counselors, treatment centers, support groups, hospitals, whatever it is as we listen that we feel like might be a fit for them. We'll check the availability, make sure it's feasible for them to afford it, and really put together a whole plan for that family to help them move forward and try to reduce the barriers that might get in the way of that.
Yeah.
So that's what we do. And then we also do a lot of education.
Yeah.
I have a podcast, Hope, Peace Together, where we interview.
Say that again slowly.
Oh, sorry.
Hope,
Peace Together.
Peace together. I love
Right.
it. Okay.
Because like a mosaic is
is
pieced together.
pieced together. Yeah.
So we interview mental health professionals and then share stories of hope. And what we then do with those podcasts is we attach them to those resource sheets. So if someone, like right before I came here, someone has a child struggling with addiction, so I, attach several podcasts on addiction and intervention and things that help make those resources more tangible to them.
Because when you're in the middle of a crisis like that, like you've been awakened to, we have a problem in our family. We know that the problem didn't start in one day,
right?
But the awareness may happen very quickly, right? I mean, it could. And you're overwhelmed. You're kind of like a go-between that's helping them navigate it.
Right. So, we have resources in our community, and then you have that awareness, but there's not always a bridge to get to those resources. So we're that bridge.
Yeah.
And the name Mosaics of Mercy came from one of our founders had a program that she wrote while she had breast cancer, and it talks about how God uses brokenness for beauty, and the whole mosaic process is an analogy of all of those different steps. And so when we started, we were doing a lot of those workshops. That's changed a little with COVID, but we still send those mosaic hearts to people so they just have something tangible. When people are struggling with a mental health or addiction issue, a lot of times that's no one's showing up, calling, saying, how are you? Or bringing the casserole by. And so we send the hearts just so someone has something tangible to know they're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw you do that demonstration to a class that I was teaching. And just so everybody will know, they take pottery or, broken plates, and she walks through this analogy of the brokenness in our lives, and then as she's talking, she's creating this heart, this small little heart, kind of the size of a coaster is the one I saw, of all the different, she makes a mosaic out of it, and it's really beautiful.
Well, when people come in, they go through that process
They
themselves.
do it themselves. Okay.
Sometimes when I speak, I'll do it just because grouting and all those different things, but workshops, people come do that process themselves, or people can just come in. Right now what we're moving to is them just coming in and volunteering and making hearts.
Yeah,
so
that's great. I love that. I know that, typically when you have something that's such a passion and like it's very evident in my time with you that this is, you didn't have a job prior to, well, you worked as a nurse, right, for a long time, but then you took a lot of time off for your kids, if I'm remembering right. I might not have a story right, but you went back to do this because this was something you were really, really passionate about. Where did that come from? I know a little bit about your story. Would you take us back to your childhood and explain kind of where the seed was planted, I think, in you a long, long time ago?
So I think as a child, there were lots of different things that made up my story, lots of pieces. And if I'm thinking about that mosaic heart, as an analogy, for me, like I had, as long as I can remember, this belief that everybody else had this perfect heart. And that then when pieces happen in my life that didn't measure up to what I thought that heart would be, I felt like there was something wrong with me. Yeah. And so I carried around a lot of shame and feelings that I really didn't know what to do with. I didn't have the tools to deal with them. And so as I grew, that there became more and more need to kind of stuff down those feelings. And that resulted in, for me, anorexia. and substance use and anxiety and depression and lots of different things. And I went to treatment for those when I was 15 and have been in recovery ever since. I had 31 years in May 13th.
Congratulations.
So, and it was a nurse that was very instrumental in that process for me. She's still part of my life today. And as a result, that's why I became a nurse and not a counselor.
Interesting.
With the goal of really giving back what was given to me. And so I went into psychiatric nursing. But what led to actually this particular piece, I mean, God, you know how God weaves things all throughout our lives. Well, I worked as a nurse in a psychiatric hospital, both inpatient and outpatient. But then when I had kids, I stayed home. And my son, Clay, who we talked about earlier, was born with a lot of medical issues. And so I spent a lot of time navigating the medical system. And it was very difficult and frustrating because he had some unusual medical things that no one could make sense of. And so that was really how I started to learn that concept of navigating and trying to find resources that might be difficult to find. And then fast forward, we had come back to the Woodlands, and my son was struggling with his anxiety and some depression, and he has a podcast that talks about that. So I'm not sharing anything that he doesn't share.
Okay.
And
what's the name of that podcast?
Well, it's my podcast, but he's an episode. Oh,
I got it. Okay, I was like, I didn't know he had a podcast. Okay, but
no, he talks about his story, some of his story with that, and we were struggling finding resources, and I was so frustrated. And we, went to the places that people normally go, like the church and our doctor and things like that, because we were newer to this community and hadn't done that here, and just kept getting these lists and then you'd call and no one was taking, clients, or it wasn't a fit. And I was so frustrated because I thought my husband and I have so much knowledge about all of this, and we can't find what we need for our son. So what must it be like for other people?
Yeah. So, and did you end up, you obviously ended up finding
resources. Yes, I did end up finding resources, but that was really at the time where then that lunch happened where I met those other ladies. And there had also been some suicides in the community at around a similar time. And I just saw a lot of misunderstanding about mental health, and so really felt called. It was actually that nurse in my life who I was complaining about all this, and she said, "Are you going to complain about this or do something?"
Yeah.
I'm like, I guess I'm doing something.
Yeah, good for her. I can see why she's still in your life.
Yes, she says she can say those hard things.
So you mentioned, and we didn't go there yet, but one part of what you do is help connect families to resources. And what I am reading between the lines is these families, you're not just giving them resources, you're connecting relationally with them.
Right. And I think that's what makes the big difference. Our community, if you go back, there's not a lot of things generally in the United States that are these navigation programs, except when it comes to cancer. It's big in oncology. So nurse navigators, that really started because, when you have breast cancer, there's just a lot of different moving parts and pieces. And so that's where that concept came from. But it's not something that's really been done a lot here, but it is being done in some other countries like Canada and a few other places. So I've kind of looked to them and attended some conferences and had some conversations with them, and they're seeing the same thing, that you can have that data out there, right? Like, we have resources on our website if someone just wants to go pick a counselor off that website, and they know that we've vetted them, that they do whatever it is that we've put them in that category for. But that doesn't really bring it to life for them. That doesn't mean that we've listened. A navigator is going to listen. They're going to listen to what that situation is, and what personality might be a fit for that? Like, what do you want in person? Do you want, virtual? Do you prefer, do you think your teen would prefer a male or a female? So we're really kind of going down and trying to find some options that really fit that person. And in that, really meeting them and having a conversation with where they are.
Yeah. And maybe even recognizing some needs that they might have that they might not even realize.
Yes, that's very true. And that's why the navigator is so important to us at Mosaics. And, we have this goal of having a community database, but for us, we do what we do because we believe in the navigation piece, and that something happens in that space that someone makes to hear someone's story. And a lot of times that navigator is the first person to hear that person's story.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Now, I know that I think you do this because I've reached out to you for this, but most of the people listening are, I would probably say most are parents, but a lot of them are parenting kids from chaotic backgrounds. So like they are dying for support. And they're buried underneath all kinds of paperwork and visitations and therapies and courts and all this kind of stuff. And so I know I had a really hard time finding, and particularly having providers that take Medicaid. And I know you've done some work in that. Have you been able to dig through and find some stuff?
Well, I mean, yes, but it's hard. I mean, that is a huge gap in our community, is those Medicaid resources. And particularly because some of the Medicaid plans they are very prolonged in providing the provider getting the money back. Getting money back. They they don't do that in a timely manner, which makes it really hard for the counselors who are having to pay their for their space and all those different things, or if they have staff that they're trying to pay, and so it makes it
how about
complicated.
Just eat dinner?
It makes it really complicated. So that is something that our community we continue to talk about, how can we fill that? I think if you go into Houston, but most of the families out here don't want to drive into Houston. There's a little, bit more options. But out here, it's definitely a struggle. So you really have to get creative with what that looks like.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that because, I just keep going back to when you're in a crisis, when you're struggling, when your kid is hurting, or when your husband is hurting, or you're hurting, like you do need someone to walk you through. And that's so important. The other thing you said that you guys do is educate. I really want to talk about that because I think that's where I was thinking, when I was introducing you, I was thinking back and thinking about the education piece. Cause I don't know, I think I understood. That's the first piece of your puzzle that I understood, or the first piece of Mosaics that I understood was the educating, because I really see that. And particularly growing up in churches, I just felt like there was a lot of, shame attached to struggling anywhere emotionally. Like, it's almost like we weren't praying, and there's not one person that said this to me. It was almost just like an error. Like, well, are you praying enough? There's all these things that we think we're supposed to be, or ways that we're supposed to act, and to sit in some other feelings that might not be those feelings is just difficult.
Right.
And to be able to ask for help. And while prayer is wonderful and powerful, it's sometimes we need something else. Just like if we went to, if we had a broken foot, we would go to an orthopedic, and they would have to set it and put a cast on it and stuff like that. We would still pray. But so talk about that. I know you've run into some resistance, and you don't have to talk too much. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I would love to hear, because I think part of what I want to do with my passion in this podcast and just in my life is to invite people to do their work, invite people to expose, to be vulnerable, to risk saying that they struggle. Because if we don't, we can't help anybody.
Right.
And then it just puts the pressure on all the people in our lives that we're trying to fix, when really we need to point it back to us, So I really, you and I connect there. I think that's our cross section, is that that we both desire that. We want to. That's something I want to shout from the mountaintops.
Actually, I think that was how we intersected, because you reviewed my application where I had to write my testimony for our child's school.
Okay. I don't.
And I think I wrote about some of this in my testimony, and then you were like, "We need to talk."
Yeah, maybe so. I don't remember that, but I remember I really liked you, and I don't know. I don't remember exactly what it was, but definitely feel like, and we can talk about this in a minute, about mental illness and mental health in my own family and how that impacted me. But go ahead.
So for the church, that was really, like I mentioned, people really go to the church, the school, or their primary care doctor usually, or a friend, right? When something's going on. And so most of us that founded Mosaics, it is founded as a ministry. We're all Christians, and we did see a gap with the church responding. And there's something about when you go to your church for help and you're met with some resistance when you're hurting, as you usually are with a mental health issue, or you're hurting because your loved one is hurting because of that, it kind of starts to feel like God's rejecting you, not just the church person, And so I felt very strongly about educating churches about that, and really helping them understand, because a lot of it is we don't know what we don't know. And I was talking to a pastor recently, and he suddenly has had some of his own struggles, and he's like, wow, my eyes are open. Like, I did not know when we had this conversation, however many years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago, I really didn't understand, but now I've experienced it myself, and wow.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it hard. For the church, there's some confusion that if you're struggling, then maybe it is, something where you're not checking these boxes.
Yeah.
You're not praying enough. You're not attending church enough. You're not going to small group enough. But someone that has a mental health condition, you've got chemicals going, genetics going, maybe trauma that's unresolved, all of that coming together. And not that prayer won't help, but sometimes we really do need those professionals, like you talked about, to help us work through that so that we can then see God in our circumstances.
And sometimes God, the view of God, or the system that maybe we grew up in that represented God, may not be accurate. And sometimes some of our mental health issues, for me, I know, came from there. I had to get to know God, a different God, different than I thought that he was. And no one person was responsible for that. But there was a belief system that I don't think is true anymore. So there's another thing that we have to navigate,
Well, and I think that we,
you didn't know we were going to get into all this,
as someone we both know, says that story that we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
So if, we may be hearing from all these different people that are part of our lives in the church, something, and then we start to fill that story for ourselves. It may or may not be what they're putting on us, but
from our background, we fill in this gaps.
Yeah, we start to fill that in,
Yeah.
and a lot of times, we may be filling that. No one may have said you aren't checking these boxes, but we get that sense from the conversation, and so then we tell ourselves, well, Tara's thinking that this is wrong because I'm not praying enough, So, and sometimes it may outright be said, but other times it's something that we kind of carry ourselves, especially if we have a lot of shame, like you and I have talked about having because of things that have happened in our past. And I think that the other thing is it's uncomfortable and it feels a little bit out of control when you're struggling, around
a lot
mental
out of
health,
control,
right?
yeah.
And people don't know sometimes how to meet someone in that. It's really uncomfortable. They don't know how to hold space and say, oh, you're hurting. Let me just be with you. They feel like they need to give you something, a concrete answer. And so for them, that concrete answer may be prayer or scripture. which is important, but maybe what we need in that moment is to have space held for us. And I look at the Bible and I see Jesus doing that all throughout the Bible. But you know how the Bible, they're the same words, but as you have different life experiences, things are revealed more and more, and you look at scripture and you're like, oh, I didn't see it that way before. I think for those of us who've maybe struggled with mental health, we can look at the Bible and see the people that are struggling too. We see Jesus having emotion. He even struggled with his emotions in the garden, and pleaded for God to take that from him. And but if we maybe don't have that lens on, that might not stand out to us in that way.
I totally agree. Yeah. And you know what? Awareness precedes action. Change. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. So let's go back to so just to kind of sum up Mosaics. So because that was the first question and we went on. That's okay. This is good. So Mosaics helps families navigate the mental health system.
Right.
Maybe y'all even say, okay, well, you have meetings over here, and you have, if you need inpatient care here, and you help find rooms or beds or whatever.
Beds and all those things.
And then you also are educating our community, which is great. That's good. Okay, I'm going to try to get us back on track here. Go back to, we weren't off track. We were never off track. Go back to, you said you went into treatment at age 15. Can you start there?
Yeah.
Will you tell us a little bit more detail than that?
So I originally, when I started struggling and started, it became, outwardly apparent as far as my weight loss. That's what became apparent to my parents, was, I went to a counselor, and the counselor really wasn't quite sure how to address some of what was going on with me. And so he then invited in this nurse that specialized in eating disorders, the nurse I'm referring to throughout my story. And so I tried for a while with them, to be able to move forward, and I just wasn't able to do it on my own. So it got to the point where I had some criteria that if I didn't meet that criteria, then I was going to have to go inpatient.
Like you're talking about weight gain
right.
or something like that.
Like if I lost any more weight, then it would be time for admission. And I wasn't able to say out loud, like, I want to go to the hospital. So I purposely lost that weight in order to be admitted. And so I was a sophomore in high school, and it was May, so I had to be checked out of school. And then I went to treatment on Mother's Day, which I now look back being a mom and think that was pretty awful for my mom.
Yeah.
But it was really the best thing that could have ever, I feel like, happened for me.
You said this, I don't want to skate over this. You said, you really wanted to go into treatment, but you felt like you couldn't ask for that. So you purposefully lost the weight.
Mm-hmm. And I think that I just got off the phone right before I came here with talking with someone actually about, it was an addiction issue, but she was saying, well, they're saying, they don't want help. And, I always let the parents know, well, they may be saying that, but that may not be what they're feeling inside. It's really hard. It's scary to let go of that thing, because even though my eating disorder or my drinking was destructive, it also was what was allowing me to keep functioning, because I didn't have those other coping skills. So, it felt like a friend. Even though it was a really big bully at the time, it felt like a friend. And so to let go of that and to be the one to voice it and say, I'm going to let go of that, was too big. So it was almost like I just had to take that action so that it was their decision to do that.
And to say, I need help. Mm-hmm. That would have been saying, I really need help.
Yeah. So that was just, that was hard for me. But so grateful because it was really hard to continue at 15 when you're trying to address all these things. That's not the common thing going on with your other classmates at, school.
Yeah.
They aren't talking about those kinds of things. They're talking about the next party or whatever. And so I really needed to be removed from that environment in order to really be able to focus on myself and have that opportunity and space to learn those tools that I needed. And that was really just the start of the journey.
Yeah.
Because I think that sometimes people think, well, I go to treatment and then
You're done.
I check the box, it's all over. But it's not. I mean, 31 years in, and I still go to meetings and I still do a lot of those tools that I learned back then. It looks different, but I'm still practicing those things because it's become a way of life for me.
Yeah.
So I think that at 15, when I went, I go back, I still have the journal that I had before I went. I've journaled forever. So I have the journal from right before I went to treatment. I have the one that I, did in treatment. And I look back and I felt so broken and I felt so different from everybody else. Like when I looked on the outside, everyone else had it together and my insides just did not match that. And
what about when you were in treatment? What about the people you met in treatment?
The people that I met in treatment, most of them, I was on an eating disorder unit, and the majority of them were older than me. I was the only 15-year-old that was there. And they were all walks of life. It wasn't just anorexia. You had, compulsive overeaters. You had bulimia. You had people from all different backgrounds. And those people, they were the first time I felt accepted in a group.
That was the first time?
So here I was, and not where people that my parents would have chosen for my friends. And that's the place that actually provided that acceptance that I probably had been craving my whole life and just, wasn't able to have. And I think it's because those people also were acknowledging their own brokenness. And so they were just able to accept and meet me where I was in mine.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, they really, I don't know, honestly, I at the time, I don't know that we were necessarily talking about our faith. We were talking about God, but everybody's got, perception of that might have been different. But to me, they were Jesus with skin on. And I don't know, I can't tell you now if I had a conversation outright about what their faith was, but if I think back and, if there's any time I need to go back to a place where I feel that love or imagine what heaven might be, feel like it's in that day room at treatment.
Wow. That's awesome. What do you ever think to yourself, I'm so grateful for my addictions?
I do. And, that's always so weird. People in program talk about all that, often talk about that. But I can't imagine, I wouldn't go back and change it. I mean, I hate the pain. I hate, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But when I look at the fact that it made me who I am today, it's how God has then used me in my life, so it's given me my purpose. It's actually how I connected to my husband. It's how I connected to a lot of people that I love in my life. So I just can't imagine not having that.
And look at the tools, because, and that's the unfortunate part, is that we save those wonderful tools for people in recovery. Isn't that sad? The tools work for everyone.
They do. There's Sean Gladding. He's a pastor in Kentucky, but he started Mercy Street, which is a church. It's part of a Methodist church in town, and it's really open for people with addictions or different kinds of recovery. And he gives a talk about what the church can learn from, the 12 steps. And part of the whole thing that he talks about is that concept that people who are in recovery, we have gone to the bottom, we've gone to the the depths. And then we've come up.
Step one?
We've been redeemed. Yeah, we've gone to that step one. And so we can meet other people in that and not shy away from it. And I think that when we come to the church, unfortunately, a lot of times people don't want to look at their own brokenness. They're hiding it, right? So if someone comes in and is so vulnerable with this, they don't know what to do with that.
Right.
Or how to really like walk with someone. Like the Bible talks about discipleship, but a lot of times discipleship looks like more like teaching the scripture versus actually walking with someone in that and living it out.
Yeah, and and I know you have, I'm not, when I first experienced, my brokenness, like I felt super alone, and everything on the outside looked so good, but I was hurting so badly. And I remember sitting in the parking lot in our neighborhood at the clubhouse area and crying and thinking to myself, if I was an alcoholic, if I become an alcoholic, they'll understand I'm hurting. Isn't that crazy? I remember thinking that, and then I quickly thought to myself, well, that's stupid, because then you're stuck with that addiction. I was able to turn it around.
Right.
But it was a very real feeling. Is you can see my hurt. I often wonder if that's where cutting comes from. We have so much pain, and we just need to see that there's something causing that pain, or show somebody this hurts. And and I want to add to that. When my mom passed away, I had friends who it was hard to be with me. I was very hard to be with, because I was so angry. I was so fearful. I was so many things. And to be with me left other people feeling like, well, what if this, you had to connect to what if they had to go through this? You know what I mean? Like, you see what I'm saying?
Oh,
and it's very hard to be with people when they're hurting. It was very hard to be with me, and I pushed people away because I knew they couldn't be with me, and I could feel they couldn't be with me, and I resented it. And that's my own work I had to do, but I understand that. And we want to fix people. We don't know how to be with people when they hurt. I don't know how to be with people. I'm learning. But
I write a lot, and someday when I ever finish my book, this will be in it, but it talks about there used to, way back, people would collect tears in bottles. So, and that was like a prized possession. And there's actually these little bottles, and I ordered one. It's like this tiny little bottle. And then they would bury that person with those tears. And so not always has culture, been so fearful of that process and that pain.
Yeah.
Or felt like it was contagious. And that's what a lot of people say with a mental health struggle. It's like people feel like I'm going to be contagious to them, so they don't want anything to do with me. And even with grief, there's a nonprofit that deals just with families who've lost children, and they talk about the fact that other families are scared to come alongside these people, because it's like this fear that means it'll happen to me too. Like, that's why God's putting me in this place to walk with this person, because I'm going to have to go through it later. So they just don't want to.
Yeah. I can't bear to go to MD Anderson. I've practiced them breathing and things, but I don't want to go down there. That's a cancer hospital for anybody not in this area, but I don't want to go. I don't want to have anything to do with that. It would be very hard for me to walk somebody through cancer. Very painful. And I think the only way we do that is by saying that. This is very hard for expressing that, because you're expressing your pain with another person's pain. And, I wrote something in my journal this morning that it just made me think of it. But this was really profound. We want to prevent pain, run from pain, isolate pain. But pain is asking us to stay with it, listen to it, and respond with love and compassion. I was like, we do. We just want to be done with it. And all the people around us, it would be comfortable that way. But I'm getting to where I'm so uncomfortable in that, pretending.
Well, I think when you have trauma, like a lot of your audience is dealing with, the trauma feels so big. So the thought is, if I feel that pain, if I open that door enough for that pain to come in, like it's going to be this all-consuming thing. And it might be if you don't have the tools to deal with it. And so then the longer and longer you try to push it down, it takes more and more effort, more and more unhealthy things to keep that going.
Medicate it, right?
And then, there is a point where eventually that won't work anymore. And for some people, for me, that happened at 15. For other people, it's, way later in life. But we can't really continue to outrun that forever.
Mm-hmm. So what do we do? I'd like to talk about, because obviously we first have to deal with our own. We can't even recognize it or be with it if we don't. And it is a gift. Nobody calls a hardship on themselves, right? Nobody wants that. But when you move through it, and maybe it takes some time on the other side, I don't know, but when you move through it, I'm so grateful for the hardest things I've been through. I'm so grateful for that. So how can we talk? How can we bring this conversation into our homes first, and then into our circles of friends, and into our churches, if that's where our community, how can we begin to do it? We're doing it right here.
Right.
We're inviting people to do it right here. But then how do we do it? I think in the home, that's where we're most intimate with people.
Well, I think it does start in the home. And, we're modeling to our kids the ways that they cope, right? And I haven't done it perfect. I see that. And, my kids are old enough now where we can talk about that and say, we've had lots of conversations about what we wish we would have done differently or known, that's been revealed along the way. But what we have tried to model, both my husband and I, coming from that recovery perspective, is that...
You met your husband in recovery at the same place?
Or just not in treatment,
okay,
but
after.
We did meet in 12-step programs.
Okay.
So anyway, that's always been an open conversation for us with our kids, and even sharing our brokenness at age appropriate levels. And it was actually even our pediatrician, who happened to be in recovery, that talked with us about that, and sharing with our kids. He had a lot of conversations with us about right timing to do that, and when they might be able to understand that. So we've regularly had those conversations, and it's so funny because my son's had dated the same girl for a long time, and she says sometimes at our dinner conversations, most families don't do this.
Right.
It doesn't sound like this normally. Because
she probably loves it.
We laugh at things that people probably wouldn't laugh at. Our most points that we were are most broken, maybe. So we try to model that for our kids, so then the times where they're struggling, they do feel like they can come and say something. And I think we try as parents to be strong and present that we've got it all together to our kids, but sometimes that's a detriment, because then they look at us and think, well, they aren't gonna, there's something wrong with me, is really the message. And I took call for a while in the emergency room for kids that come in with mental health situations, and that, we'd ask, well, have you talked to your parents? And it's like, no, they would be so upset. So they're carrying around these expectations that we may or may not actually be saying out loud, but they're feeling from us, that if they're having these emotions and they see us having it all together, then there's something they're doing wrong.
Yeah. Or I can't do this to my parent, I think there is there's got to be a fine line between, and I walk this very like a razor blade, but whoopsies, of being authentic and also reassuring my kids that I am strong and I will move through this. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, you know, some nights I just can't pull it off. You know, I can't get there. No matter how much deep breathing or yoga I did or whatever, I just, you know, I got to check out. I'll be better tomorrow, but I either haven't had enough sleep, my hormones are off. There's something that I feel like I'm not able to manage. But just reminding our kids that, you know what? I need to take a time in. I need to take a break. It might be tomorrow, but I'll be better.
I think that's like it. It's not authentic. Necessarily using our kids to dump all our stuff on. So that's not what I'm saying.
Yes, I agree.
Because they aren't there like for us to process our stuff with. That's a whole, you know, that'd be a whole other podcast. Yeah. But that idea that we can have a bad day and then they see us work through that. You know, my husband and I went through a really difficult time, and I guess we did a podcast for Stonebridge Church on this. He and I did together. And, you know, one of the blessings out of that, it was not a fun experience, but one of the blessings out of that was that our kids saw us come through the other side. And then the conversations that we've been able to have about that and the perspective it's given them of, okay, that is possible. Like it can look really messy and then you do the hard work and you can get to the other side. But they didn't need to be in the weeds on all the details of that. We
need to create our own support system. Right. They aren't our support system, but it is healthy for our kids to watch us move through our support system, move through our things. Yeah, I think that's right. I knew you were saying that. I just wanted to clarify that because sometimes you can get down in there and you need to rack up and go call somebody.
Right. I know. And that's hard. I mean, that can be hard, especially as they get older and they're so attuned to, you know, all your different moods and gestures and things.
Yeah. So how can they, let's wrap this up with something that I think would be really valuable. And that is, because you and I could talk a whole bunch more, you know, my dad committed suicide. I've mentioned that on the podcast before. There were warning signs that we saw, my brothers and I, we didn't know exactly what to do. We tried to handle it on our own. And we couldn't, but, you know, so we can talk about that briefly, but I'd like to just talk about like, what are some of the things that we as parents can do to notice, to be aware if our kids are struggling. I think we've talked about one, we've just woven it in the whole thing, is we got to be aware of our own mental and emotional health and spiritual health. I think, you know, that's all part of it. It's all connected. So being aware of our own stuff, then being not hiding from our children, right? What else would you say? How can we have these kinds of conversations? You said that you've just always done it. Well, what if you haven't just always done it? How do you enter in this type of conversation with, say you have a child that comes in, and, you know, we can't pry too, when foster kids come in, I mean, you gotta kind of sit back, right? A little while and let,
right, you have to have that trust.
Connection, yeah. So, but what are some things we could do that you can think of off the top of your head?
Well, I think there's a few. And one of the things that, and even being people that were very aware of mental health, it's still different when it happens in your family, right? Yeah. Like, just like my son, he turned blue when he was little and quit breathing. Well, I'm a nurse. I know CPR. But when I have to do it on my child, like, and your adrenaline's pumping, that's a whole different scenario. Well, it's the same for mental health. So having that conversation with your spouse, I mean, especially if you're adopting, I mean, more than likely there are going to be some issues. So having that conversation before the crisis occurs. Like, a lot of times we wait and then this crisis is going on and suddenly we have to make all these decisions, and it's your feelings and my feelings, and we've got to come together on that to then move forward for this child, and that's hard. So having that conversation ahead of time of, if one of us struggles, if our child struggles, if one of us struggles, how are we going to handle that? Are we okay with counseling? What kind of counselor would we want? Do we only want a faith-based counselor? Do we, want that counselor to, take insurance? What are we willing to invest in something like that? Having those conversations seem kind of crazy when you're not in it, but that's the best time to have them, because it's really hard when those emotions are running high. So having a plan for your family, then being open and talking about emotions, and then being okay creating that space and being comfortable in the uncomfortable. So when our child comes in and they're hurting, it's hard as a parent to not have these stories running through our head. And I know the stories, like for me, well, how can I fix it? Or what did I do to cause this? Or
what does this mean?
What does this mean? Or, oh my gosh, they're freaking out. Now they're never going to graduate from college. Whatever it is, I just go there. So really being able to say, okay, no, stop and do my breathing, stop and breathe, and really try to listen and hold space. Because what do you want when you're hurting? Do you want someone to throw lots of solutions at you? Or do you want someone to, meet you in that and just sit in you with that until you're at a point where you're ready to move forward to the next step? So I think that's really hard for us as parents, to not let our mind run ahead, even if think we're kind of holding space, our mind's running ahead with all these things, but being able to be present and asking God to help us be present in that. And even though I know this doesn't sound necessarily mental health related, but it is, and that's really learning our kids' love language. And that's because, it's different for each of us. So if I know what my kids' love language is, then I know when they're hurting. Okay, actually, if they like touch, well, then I know when they're hurting that's a way I can meet them there without having to ask, or, that's something that's going to feel nurturing to them in that moment where they're hurting. So how can I learn those so I can best meet my child where they are? Because then that is how you develop that relationship, that then they feel safe to come to you the next time. So those are, I think, some of the big things, as well as, educating ourselves so that we're not as scared and fearful when these things happen.
Yeah, right. Just because we're having a bump in the road doesn't mean we're going off the highway.
Yep.
It doesn't mean it's crash and burn. It's actually an invitation for something greater. Very quite possibly,
Someone once said to me that, because I've always been kind of the glass half empty, which my husband is not. He's the half full rosy rainbows. And so that's always been a thing. But she was like, you realize, like a scale, like if you're talking about those old timey scales, she's like, you were giving so much weight to the negative, but you realize it's just as equal over here on the positive. And that's something I've really had to take into my parenting, because people who've had trauma are very hyper vigilant. So I'm very hyper vigilant to making sure that I want to head off any trouble for my children.
Of course you are.
So, being able to look at it and know that, okay, there's, a chance this could turn out good too. There's a chance this can be used for good. It's not so much just on the bad side.
Yeah. I see it. Isn't it funny? I see it in your kids. You see, I see how Clay's anxiety and his way talking about on your podcast and sharing with my son, who, by the way, our sons are best friends and have lived together for the last 3 years, and how empowering he is for Kaysen too. It's just beautiful. Like, I'm so grateful. I'm so thankful now. Now I'm not going, oh yeah, I can't wait for the next one. Ooh, what's it going to be like?
I know. I'm not there
But
either.
there's been a lot of things that would be weird,
Yeah. We don't want to hurt as humans. We just don't want to hurt.
We don't want to hurt.
But we don't want our loved ones to hurt either.
No, but we can take some comfort in knowing that whatever comes our way will offer us something great.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And we talk to a lot of families who've lost loved ones because of to suicide
Yeah.
or addiction. And one of the things that we talk about is that that doesn't mean the journey was for nothing. Like there's still purpose in that for you. There's still purpose in that for the person, you know, who isn't there. It's still redeemable. It may not look like what we envisioned, but your experience with your dad is part of who you are and what you bring to life.
Yeah. And you know, we should have another episode on that, but my it was horrible. It was horrible. It was not what we would ever dream of. But you know, one thing that we as a family, my brothers and my dad, my husband, we decided on his memorial, which was very close after his death, is we would not speak of it.
I remember that. I was there, yeah.
We will call it what it is, and we will speak of it. And that is honoring to my dad, and it was honoring to everyone out there who has thought of it. I mean, it got it out of the dark, you know, and so I will speak about it, and I will talk about it, and I love my dad, and I see him, you know, free. And he was struggling, and I think we have to have another episode on that. We have to talk about that another time. But anyway, yeah, I think it's important that we don't keep things like that. That we do talk about that ahead of time, because it's not something that is shrinking in numbers, is it?
Oh no, the numbers are growing.
Yeah.
And especially even after this past year, it's just continuing to grow because of all the different stressors and all the different things that have happened to so many people at once.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's something that we have to bring to light. I just wrote an article for a magazine that talked about, like, it's the elephant in our community that people don't want to talk about. The state of Texas is, there's a new statistic out from NAMI that we are 50th out of 51 states, which the 51st is the District of Columbia, in access to mental health care. Well, you know, that kind of stinks. So
What do you mean? Like we don't have
right. It's that we are, our state is extremely behind in are being able to access resources when they need them, not only because of financial concerns like Medicaid, like we're talking about, but that is a big piece, but also like for our community, it's like one mental health professional to, I think it's 1,300 and something people. So, you know, there's a shortage in providers, and that's why it's all the more important to have those types of navigation programs and things to make sure someone gets to a place.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing that, because I know it's a huge sacrifice for your family, but I also know that it's definitely driving, your passion is definitely driving it, and you're excited, and we need people talking about it. You know, we need people talking. I think, you know, with my dad, I'm sitting here thinking, I think we knew something was wrong because it happened really fast, like within a week. Like, whoa, Dad, what is going on? And but we didn't think that. We didn't think that, you know, until the morning of, when we couldn't get a hold of him. Then the thought. So probably it was there. We just didn't want to. We didn't want to go there. You know what I mean? And so anyway, yeah, I think that. We all, maybe we don't all, but do we all have thoughts like the world would be better off without me? Or do just some of us have those thoughts sometimes?
I think a lot of people have those thoughts, and that's hard to admit, or they may not even slow down enough to admit it to themselves. Yeah. And that doesn't, you know, necessarily mean that you're going to take action on that.
It's how you feel in that moment.
In that moment. There's something, there's a a counselor, Adam Bertosh, that talks about like, what part of your story do you not like? Because it's usually just part of your story you're wanting to stop,
but
not the whole thing.
But you're looking at the scale and the scale again.
Yeah. So what is that? Because when you know that, then you can address that and it doesn't feel so big. But I think we all have moments just as human beings where we're like, this is too much.
Yeah.
I mean, all throughout the Bible, there were people who were like, this is too much.
Too much. That's right. Yeah. All right. Let's just keep shouting from the mountaintops. Yeah. We all struggle. We all have days, moments, times that are just cruddy.
Well, and I think that the other important piece of that is that we don't have to be on the end of the spectrum we're talking about with suicide or addiction or anorexia. Like we all have mental health. If we are kicking and breathing, we've got a brain, we got mental health. So it's something that we all need to be talking about regardless of whether it's over here on this side. Because the more we do, the more likely an intervention to that situation would happen sooner, so you wouldn't have the destruction of some of these things.
Yeah, exactly. Stay aware all the time. Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I was looking forward to this. Thank you for joining us. It's a heavy topic today, but it's super important. And, I think Sherry's right. The more we talk, the more we share in just with one person. You just have to have one person that you feel comfortable sharing with. And, the chances are you already have that person in your life. You just haven't made that you haven't taken that risk to share. But you probably know who that person is. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're feeling discouraged today, if you're feeling alone, foster parenting and adoptive parents, it can feel really lonely because you do look out and you think, well, they can go to the movies, or their children are sitting at that table quietly, or why aren't their children crawling underneath the couch and spitting at you or whatever? You can feel really, really alone. And so I just want to encourage you today that you're not alone. I guarantee you there is somebody else listening right now, and it's probably me talking, that has felt what you're feeling, because I have felt a wide gamut of emotions on this journey. So share it with somebody. Do not sit there alone. Share it with somebody. At the very least, send me a message, because I'd love to have that message. So, anyway, thanks for joining us. Share the podcast. We all need to become more aware. We do all have mental health, and we need to take care of it. So do yourself a favor and do that. Share, like, subscribe, do all those things, and we'll see you next week.
Mama's well.
Yes, she